Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Psychedelic Insights, where I'm joined by Del Potter, Chief Science Officer of Spiritus Bioscience. I'm very excited to conduct this interview as Del Potter has an enormous amount of experience working in the field. I'll read a little bit about him in his bio right now, and then I'll let him intro himself, and we'll get going from there. So, with over 40 years of relevant experience, Del began his work as an anthropologist and neuropharmacologist, learning psychedelic medicine from native people, and continued his tutelage under Alexander Shulgin, working on sublingual, shorter acting delivery of 5-MeO DMT. He has a portfolio of novel chemical entities with no prior patented art and built the largest cannabis manufacturing facility in California, widely recognized as the most advanced of its kind. I want to just say hi to everyone.
Hi, everybody.
All right, perfect. So let's get this started. All right, so to lead things off here, I'd like to understand what is psychiatric anthropology.
Well, psychiatric anthropology is, I want to start with a little background on psychological anthropology, which is sort of an interdisciplinary subfield of anthropology that studies the interaction of cultural and mental processes. And it tends to focus on ways in which human development and inculturation within a particular cultural group with its own history, language, practices, and cultural conceptual categories, how that shapes human cognition, emotion, personality development, and particularly in my case, mental health. And that's where psychiatric anthropology kind of diverges because it's particularly interested in how other cultures handle mental health issues or how mental health services can be delivered cross-culturally. I mean, I should say medical anthropology, it's existed almost as long as anthropology itself. And it kind of emerged in North America as an effort to link international public health, ethnomedicine, and social science sort of in an anthropology of development. So it was really in the beginning kind of in the service of a colonial anthropology of development. I came into the field during the 70s and 80s when there was a more critical Marxist and symbolic phenomenological analysis that was challenging that existing framework. So I was very much influenced by Marxist and phenomenological critique. My particular approach was to focus particularly on mental health issues again, and how I was really interested in how anthropology as a discipline can inform treatment of psychiatric issues in Western European societies. And so that's sort of a general overview.
So is that kind of where like psychedelics will fit into this in some capacity?
Yeah. So psychedelics are kind of a core element of treatment of mental health issues cross-culturally in indigenous societies. And so I began to be, originally I was really focused on psychosocial development, and I was particularly interested in the cross-cultural development of the shamanic practitioner, and how, what commonalities there might be across cultures in the development of shamanic practitioners in different indigenous societies. As time went on, I became more and more focused on what is kind of referred to as ethno-psychopharmacology, which is really the aspect of shamanic formulation and the use of psychedelic compounds in the treatment of mental health issues in indigenous societies. So that became more of a focus as time went on, and I kind of diverged from looking at psychosocial history and more into shamanic formulation.
Understood. So when you're saying the commonalities between shamanic practices, so I'm understanding that psychedelics was definitely one commonality. Are there any others you can talk about?
Sure. I have a kind of general overview that I reference as the kind of the way that it's a cross-culturally relevant commonality that is, in shamanic practice across cultures. And that is that whereas in Western societies, we tend to look at a particular issue, a medical issue, and say, okay, in order to treat your broken arm, we're going to fix your broken arm. In indigenous societies generally, they are not simply interested in that particular issue. They want to know, why did you break your arm? Did you fall out of step with somebody in your immediate social network? Did you break a cultural taboo or a rule that is now distracting you and you're going down the wrong path? So an attempt is made not simply to repair the broken arm, but also to address some of these other contextual social issues, like if you're arguing with someone in your immediate social network, let's address that as well. And if you're out of step with you've broken a rule or a cultural taboo, what can we do to reintegrate you back into society and kind of remove that sense of guilt?
So kind of like trying to clean up everything as opposed to just focusing on the main issue, or like the
Yeah,
symptom.
you're really to see a kind of context for why that particular medical problem and particularly mental health issue might have occurred, and to look at addressing all the elements of that context as well as the particular incident itself.
Understood. So this is probably where psychedelics can take a huge role in regards to kind of sorting this out, because of, I guess, the way they work and the perspective that you get while on psychedelics, and the ability to kind of really dig into that.
Yeah, exactly. What it allows kind of a look, and a very direct look at some of these other contextual aspects that can be overlooked if you're in kind of a reductionist perspective, and it broadens kind of the way you look at things. And one of the things that I really found out really through working with shamanic practitioners is the sophistication of the way formulations are constructed. That is, it's very individualized. It varies not only between practitioners, but it varies depending upon the individual problem and solution that's being addressed, as well as the individual that's being addressed. So there's a tremendous amount of sophistication that goes into the formulation work to address a particular situation and individual.
That's really interesting. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little more, if you can give some examples? Because like the most immediate one that would come to mind in what we have, or like this the way we look at psychedelics today, and like biotech companies going through trials, let's say for example like ADHD and LSD, that would be something like that. I'm sure what you're talking about is much more I guess intricate, or it's not as simple as what I'm saying.
Yeah. So in this particular case, I think it was Jonathan Ott who, outlined that for ayahuasca, over 100 different botanicals can be used in the construction of an ayahuasca beverage. And again, that varies between practitioners, but it also is constructed differently for different situations. So they have this palette that they draw upon in order to create a very specific beverage for a specific person and a situation. So and within ayahuasca, there are different varieties of Banisteriopsis caapi, for example, that are used specifically for different types of treatment strategies.
So you're saying it would be, is it different concentrations of the active ingredients in the mixture, or is it just different, like different types from different plants will yield different effects?
It's actually both. Ayahuasca is traditionally brewed in a certain way to produce a quality that can vary depending upon what you put into it in the beginning. So, in other words, there's a number of different varieties of Banisteriopsis caapi. There's different varieties of DMT sources, Anadenthera peregrina, and other Anadenthera species that are used in the construction of a particular beverage. And how long you brew it and exactly how you do it can actually alter the experience.
Oh, that's really interesting. I never knew that. So actually, you mentioned DMT there. DMT is my probably my top two favorite psychedelics of all time. I've done a lot of work with DMT over the last 20 years. So I've noticed, obviously this is just pulling from like personal experience right now, but I've noticed in different extractions or where I've gotten the DMT from, like wildly different experiences from dose to dose. And obviously I understand that it can be dose dependent depending on how much you're taking in, but and obviously DMT is esoteric at nature. But I've noticed some significant differences where it's almost like night and day between other types of NN-DMT I was getting. Is that play into what you're saying at all?
It absolutely does. The source of the DMT, can be different and create a different type of experience. The way you actually the way you construct the say ayahuasca beverage. For example, there are fruit sugars that occur depending upon how you construct it, that can make the experience more or less uh, nauseating or more purging. And it's used specifically by shaman to provoke a type of purge experience, more or less depending upon their evaluation of the situation. So I mean, I'm much more familiar with the construction of ayahuasca beverages, but DMT sourcing varies widely. There's a tremendous amount of, in the Amazon, you're getting not only DMT but 5-methoxy DMT as well.
Oh, really? Are you talking about in the ayahuasca beverages that you're talking about? You're talking about when people are just getting DMT there?
Yeah, you're going to get bufotenine, you're going to get DMT, you're going to get 5-methoxy DMT, and you're going to get these things in varying amounts depending upon what the botanical sources are.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I guess to bridge this into the next thing we're going to talk about. So how did you meet Alexander Shulgin? And what do you remember most about him? And what were some valuable things you learned while working with him?
Um, I was fortunate, as a post-grad student to have a mentor who was part of the group that was kind of around Alexander Shulgin. It was kind of referred to informally as the Owl Club. And I was just fortunate that this person took me to a Friday night salon at Alexander Shulgin's house, and I was introduced to the Owl Club and kind of the group that was around him. And it was composed of, it was a really interdisciplinary group. It was, not just chemists and psychiatrists and psychologists, but also artists, musicians, philosophers, cultural icons. And it was a really interdisciplinary mix of people, all kind of with a common interest in psychedelics. To me, that interdisciplinary nature of it is something I kind of miss in some ways. It was incredibly stimulating to be around all these people who were brilliant in all these different fields. And so, I kind of announced to Dr. Shulgin that I was very interested in DMT and 5-methoxy DMT. And he was really beneficent and took a lot of trouble to kind of introduce me to the chemistry around it. And really, I began to be more focused on organic chemistry and neuropharmacology as a result. And he kind of introduced me to the novel chemistry around variants of other compounds that are in that same genre class.
That's really interesting. So In regards to, once again, we'll get back to DMT, I guess. I could probably talk to you about this the whole time, to be honest. So can you tell us about kind of, so there's this ongoing, I guess, debate in regards to when you take DMT, where you're going, what you're experiencing. Some people will kind of say that it's just your neurons misfiring, different parts of your brain connecting that usually don't, and then things are happening. Um, when I've done DMT, it feels incredibly real. Wherever it is you're going, whatever you're tapping into, it's like more real than what real is. It's eerie how real it feels. Um, and it's like almost a religious experience. Like that's the most eloquent way I can put it. So do you have a kind of any opinion on kind of the DMT realm, where you're going, what you're experiencing?
Well, I have noticed that, whatever culture, whatever shamanic practitioner I've kind of engaged with, there are some commonalities and touchstones in the DMT world that seem to be kind of consistent. Today, we talk a lot about encountering entities or friendly entities that are kind of instructive. Uh, you get the same thing in an ayahuasca experience in an indigenous context as well, except the images tend to be less alien entities and more jungle related imagery, more animal related imagery. I can say, for example, during one of my first ayahuasca experiences, I felt I was being pursued by a large anaconda or a boa constrictor, like a snake. And I, told this to the shamanic practitioner that I was with, and he said, "That is actually the vine. That is the ayahuasca vine, trying to speak to you and trying to instruct you and give you some direction." So even though it wasn't necessarily the same type of described entity relationship that we kind of find in contemporary DMT accounts, it did have repeatedly these touchstones of imagery that I found to be kind of like instructive.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that in terms of I feel like, so obviously, so the bulk of my experience is with DMT. I've done ayahuasca before. It's just for me, DMT is more readily accessible, and I very much understand it. So I'm very comfortable working with it. But it was one of the places where and I tell my friends this all the time, where I growing up, I felt like I didn't have the correct type of guidance. And I
Mhm.
went to seek guidance, and the place where I got that guidance, at least for myself, was through DMT work. Like it was almost like night and day. I would go in with questions. Sometimes I would get answers, sometimes I won't, but I'd always come back feeling like there was, like I was being taken care of in some interesting way. And like, to build on what you were saying also in terms of things, or things that you might experience in that realm, that can be, you were mentioning it can be like different shamanic rituals will, like they'll see it in like one practice somewhere else, and then maybe you'll see it in like a different region. It's like they're talking about specific things. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, exactly. Like some of the common imagery that you'll see are giant snakes. Um, Jaguar is a super common image, and that jaguar usually, is referenced by the shaman as the uh, the DMT trying to instruct you, trying to teach you something, and trying to also recognizing that you have, a difficulty or a problem, and trying to address uh, kind of a hole in you, like trying to fill something in you. And you just see this repeatedly across a number of different indigenous societies. You see the same imagery again and again. So that's why I'm struck by the current conversation around the ontological basis for entities. There is something going on with DMT. It's expressed differently in different cultures, but I think it's sort of the same phenomenon.
You're giving me goosebumps just saying this. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, like with every fiber of my being. So like in regard, so I actually I've had an experience through DMT where I don't remember what the dosage was, but I turned into a jaguar and I was just sitting there like like I was on my porch somewhere I lived in Queens, and I was just growling. And like that was the extent of the experience. But I remember like I never forgot that one because I just found it so interesting to
Yeah.
like just turn into a completely different, like into an animal.
Yeah, Claudio Naranjo, I think, was one of the first researchers to give ayahuasca, to compare the imagery that people experienced when ayahuasca was given to people in urban settings and when it was given to people in more rural or jungle settings. And what was interesting is you get the same imagery, whether you're in an urban context or whether you're in this jungle rural context. And, I always found that to be, really of interest. It's kind of a very specific mechanism of action in terms of neuropharmacology.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting. So like to add to basically like I agree with everything that you're saying, but to add to it, so have you ever heard of the blue woman? Um
Yeah.
so my I want to say it was so I started smoking, or I started experimenting with DMT when I was 19 years old, so like pretty young. So by the time I was like 24 years old, I already had many reps under my belt, to say the least. I'd done DMT a bunch of times, and it was all just super profound and really interesting. Now, this one experience, I'll give a little. I was on a roof in Brooklyn. That's where I would smoke the DMT. It was on a roof at my apartment building in Brooklyn, and basically I did the DMT. On the exhale, I all of a sudden felt like the presence of something. It felt like purple or blue. I just remember feeling a color and being like, oh my God, what is this? And then the most psychedelic euphoria I've ever felt in my entire life came over me. And I just felt the presence of this blue woman, and she was just coming up to me, talking to me, embraced me. I felt full of love. Amazing. It was easily the most one of the most profound DMT experiences of my life. And that was a while ago, before I was even looking up anything on DMT on the internet. Like they didn't have like trip reports at that point. And then a couple of years ago, I started going online and looking up kind of like about the DMT entities and what we're seeing. And then I just keep seeing the blue woman, the blue woman, the blue woman. And that blew me away. Um, how are so many people who could be some people read about it beforehand and then they experienced it. But in my experience, I had no imprinting of any blue woman before I went into the DMT realm. I 100% saw this entity, and it was extremely profound and beautiful. So
Yeah,
um
I'm really interested in how we might really kind of explore that landscape on, a less circumscribed time. And I'm really interested in extended state DMT, some of the work that's going on with Andrew Gallimore and other people who are kind of looking at how we adjust to the DMT space and how we, over a period of a slightly longer experience, begin to be able to define the contours of that experience and what's going on in that landscape. And I think that's going to open up, a whole other level of knowledge about what's taking place now in an indigenous shamanic context. Shamans are very practiced at using those images and imagery to promote a specific type of healing or to address specific mental health issues, and using those characters and explaining how they work to your advantage psychologically. They're very practiced in being able to do that.
so essentially, like if you would see one of these entities come up during one of your psychedelic journeys, they'd kind of know how to integrate it for you. Is that
They take what that entity was relaying to you, what your experience with that entity is, and reinterpret it as exactly how that's going to be a benefit to you and what you're being told and what instructions you're receiving going forward. Basically, how that symbol is kind of evaluating your situation and offering a synthesis of how you should proceed.
Oh wow, that's incredibly more complex than I would have thought, and that's like, so in regard to the way we're kind of approaching psychedelic therapy now, this kind of puts that to shame. It's
Well, it's far more sophisticated than people realize.
yeah.
That's what I will say, and it goes all the way down to the pharmacology and the formulation. They're doing some very sophisticated, specific things, and it's difficult for us to fully understand. This legacy practice that goes back thousands of years. Through that practice, they've been able to develop techniques, strategies, and references and knowledge about the DMT space and how to use it to their advantage.
So can you tell us about like some of your experiences with DMT?
I'll start with, uh, I'm going to start with my first experience with what I believe to have been primarily 5-methoxy DMT.
Hmm.
It's a yopo uh, a yopo type preparation. Uh, it's referred to that way. I had my first experience among the Yanomami people in Brazil, and they will use yopo like very regularly, once, twice a day sometimes. And it's an extremely strong botanical preparation. They'll take ash, they'll take the extract of seeds, they'll take ground up seed, and they'll make this kind of a bolus. And the way it was administered to me was using kind of the same blowgun that's used for uh, hunting birds.
Hmm.
Uh, and it wasn't specifically for administration of the drug. It was really for hunting birds. They'll put this bolus in it, and you put it up your nose, and one person will blow it up your nose. And I would say that by the time that botanical preparation hit the back of my nose, I was higher than I'd ever possibly conceived of being. That it was an immediate effect. I was laying under a jungle canopy, and I watched as kind of the foreground and background of the canopy switched places. And coincident with that change of perception of watching the background become the foreground, all of the unconscious material that I had kind of been suppressing all came rushing forward at the same time. I was like overwhelmed with how real and how immediate it was. And then, thinking that, wow, this is really overwhelming. I don't know if I can handle this. And by the time I kind of got my sense of balance in the situation, I was already starting to come down. So it was probably one of the most profound experiences I've ever had.
And that was with 5-methoxy.
I believe that the preparation it had DMT, but primarily had 5-methoxy DMT in it.
Understood. So I guess can you tell us more about what you learned from working with indigenous tribes regarding psychedelic medicine? I know you touched on it in the conversation we've had so far, but if you can go into more detail.
Yeah, the way indigenous people use, there's a couple of different use practices. One is like, for example, yopo. It's used regularly and I would almost describe it as a kind of recreational use. But then there's a more profound ceremonial use that's way different and is really used to address a specific problem, either in the community or for an individual. Shaman will use ayahuasca themselves to be able to predict the direction of the group, of the community, and to look at ways or strategies for the community going forward. Now, this may involve, how much hunting and how much farming to do. some really, it'll take sort of that esoteric experience and use it to actually direct a community strategy. So there's a wide range of use within indigenous societies, all the way from recreational to sort of a profound ceremonial use, where it's used to treat individuals and individual problems. And then there's also the shaman using it, and this is usually a particular type of shaman who is kind of a more community oriented and has specific powers that allow them to kind of use it to direct the community.
That's really interesting. So I guess what pops into my head when you say that, so in a lot of sort of like more esoteric psychedelic experiences, I feel like, or especially with DMT, you, when you're in the space, you feel like you have all these answers and you're filled with, almost like you get filled with information, not like it's even that you're learning, it just, it comes to you and it fills you up. But then as you're exiting that psychedelic space, retaining that information is incredibly difficult, or at least in my experiences. So are these shamans able to kind of come back with information and retain it in a different way than the average like psychonaut who's experimenting with psychedelics here?
They use it quite regularly, and that's sort of how they reinforce what they learn from the experience. But generally, I'll also say that the shamanic personality is a heck of a lot different than the average person. Shaman are selected for a particular genetic proclivity. It usually runs in family lineages. Those family lineages, don't always, produce someone who is going to be a great shaman, but they usually tend to come from these family lineages. And then that person will usually go through a period of time where whatever intuitive powers that they have are expressed in such a way that it's uncontrollable and they have tremendous difficulty with them. So they'll go through a period of adolescence where or post-adolescence, where they're lost and they're hearing voices and they really don't know how to control the intuitive powers that they have. And then if they're fortunate, they find someone who takes them on as a mentor, and there's a process of initiation over a period of time. And if they actually survive that, then they become the type of shaman who can use the psychedelic experience in a very effective way. So there's a tremendous amount of training that goes on in order to produce that individual.
Oh, that's really interesting. So in regards to psychedelics in general, so you've been researching psychedelic medicine before it was even cool to research psychedelic medicine, for lack of a better term. So 30 years ago, how would people react when you would tell them about the work you were doing?
At first, there was just a small group of people who were interested in psychedelics, and it was really it was in the context of the drug war. So research in psychedelics, at first, there was a lot of interest, and then as time went on, it kind of got subsumed under the drug war, and so it became less and less attractive. I mean, I think it was sort of coincident when Reagan became president. At that point, interest in psychedelics fell off drastically, and I kind of feel like the cultural zeitgeist kind of turned to cocaine at that point, and there was just a tremendous lack of interest. It just kind of fell off a cliff. So the flame was kind of kept going by small groups of people who, were very interested in seeing research kind of continue, but there was no funding available, and it was looked at as kind of a recreational or a casualty of the drug war.
So then, how do you feel about kind of this new age psychedelic renaissance, so to speak, that we're experiencing?
Well, I'm really surprised and pleased. I never thought that this would really be revisited in my lifetime, and that we would actually be seeing something like the recognition of, say, psilocybin as a treatment for mental health issues, uh, or for the amount of research that's taking place. It's something I really never expected. I really thought that, it would, take another 50 years for us to revisit. There was a tremendous amount of interest early on, you know, at McGill University, Harvard, the stuff that happened with Timothy Leary. There was a bunch of research going on, and then it just suddenly, you know, the funding just completely dried up, and it became, really difficult to do.
Understood. So to build on kind of the conversation that we're having and this new age of psychedelics we are experiencing, a lot of these companies are trying to take the psychedelic trip out of psychedelics for mental health purposes. So we have like psychoplastogens and just these NCEs that are going to come to market over the next, let's say, 10 years plus. How do you feel about kind of divorcing the actual psychedelic experiences from the psychedelic itself in terms of the efficacy it can show on mental health?
Well, I'm really interested in, there's been some very recent research uh, that really suggests the uh, kind of the beneficial therapeutic effects. Some beneficial therapeutic effects might be slightly divorced from the perceptual changes that we sort of identify as the psychedelic experience. But overall, uh, my perspective is that the therapeutic benefit really doesn't come from simply the neurogenesis or changes in neuroplasticity that are, one of the effects of psychedelics. I really think it's the change in brain communication that's most valuable. So, uh, really, the disintermediation of the default mode network in the brain, and the communication between brain structures like the amygdala and other parts of the brain without sort of the interference of the default mode network, and that flattening of the landscape to allow communication is where the real therapeutic benefit lies. So I am suspicious of, you know, the enterprise to take the psychedelic experience out, because I'm not sure that it's going to be beneficial. It may actually show some beneficial effect, but I don't think that's where the core therapeutic benefit is. I often thought that maybe a treatment paradigm might work something like a couple of initial experiences with a full psychedelic, but then to increase the durability of the treatment effect, maybe 6 months down the line, you take something that's a psychoplastogen that helps to reinforce the insights that you gained 6 months ago from the full psychedelic. But I'm not, first of all, we haven't seen any real direct clinical benefit, either cognitive, emotional, or therapeutic benefit from psychoplastogens yet. We've seen some animal studies that seem to indicate some beneficial effect, but as someone who does research in this area, I will tell you that until you get something into the clinic and start working with human beings, you haven't really established a therapeutic benefit.
Understood. So then what is your kind of, if you were, so we know that it's likely that Compass is going to be the first like psychedelic formulation of psilocybin that's medicinally approved. What is your kind of perspective on how that can roll out, and in terms of how uh I don't know. So I guess I'll ask this by telling you my answer first. Um my perspective is it's going to be a very difficult rollout just because of how long people are going to be under the influence of the psilocybin. So it's like to have, let's say, an 8-hour experience with a psychedelic therapist, it just seems like there's going to be a huge roadblock there or a bottleneck. And I'm just wondering what your perspective is into how that kind of.
Well, this is a central focus of mine. Absolutely. And working in the area of formulation and delivery, I think is another way we can contour the psychedelic experience to be more beneficial and operate within certain parameters that make the therapeutic benefits more accessible. So one of the things I'm working on is a new delivery method for psilocin. So instead of using psilocybin, the prodrug, I go directly to the active metabolite and deliver it with a 100 microliter spray sublingually. And what we're seeing when you use the metabolite rather than psilocybin is one, a much faster onset and a much more predictable onset. So we're seeing like a 10-minute onset as
Oh,
opposed
wow.
to, an hour, depending upon what you've eaten, through a regular oral administration. And then we're seeing a much more circumscribed experience, like a 3-hour experience, as opposed to, a 4 to 6 to 8 hour experience. Of course, some of this is dosage related, but I think overall, it's a better utilization of clinical resources if we can accomplish in a slightly shorter period of time what it normally takes, say, LSD to accomplish in 12 hours. The other thing is adverse effects. I would say 20 to 25% of people, 20% in clinical research, but I believe the number is higher than that, experience nausea, and in some cases, extreme nausea. And in some cases, maybe not nausea, but an unease, a feeling of unease or discomfort really resulting from GI issues. And a lot of this has to do with the dephosphorylation of psilocybin into psilocin, but it also has to do with delivering it orally through hepatic digestion. So my approach is to deliver it pregastrically, avoid gastric digestion entirely, deliver it straight to the bloodstream with the active metabolite, and we're seeing no adverse effects, like no nausea, and a much, starting off on a better foot, really, for the experience. And I feel like that, and really what I'm doing there is I'm taking the pharma project in its best sense, which is really to make the experience safer, more targeted, less adverse effects, and trying to craft it that way and contour it that way.
Understood. So a 10-minute onset, that's incredible. That's huge, in my opinion. And yeah, that would definitely be changing the way we would kind of look at rolling out kind of this whole psychedelic therapist with the patient kind of paradigm, because I do think like breaching on 8 to 10 hours, where however long it'll take, is just, it's not that feasible, in my opinion.
Yeah, what we're seeing is a situation where these clinics basically can see, a facilitator or a practitioner can see like one person in a day, really. And as you pointed out, that may not be the most effective or cost-effective use of clinical resources. So if we can even cut into that a bit, if we can make it so that you could see 2 or 3 patients a day, with a shorter, more circumscribed experience that's more predictable with less adverse effects, then that may lead directly to a more cost-effective strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, so this is the work that you're doing with Spiritus Bioscience, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Really looking at that last mile to the patient, how these compounds are formulated and delivered. I mean, the search for novel chemistry is interesting. It's a very capital intensive enterprise. And it's an uncertain outcome because you never know if it's going to work or not. So what, I see perhaps more opportunity or an overlooked opportunity in taking the psychedelics that we have and formulating, and this is something I kind of learned from shamanic practitioners, is formulating it to contour the experience differently and to take the edges off and make it more the type of experience that we want to see.
Oh, that's really interesting, and actually, really, what you're saying really resonates with me. Like I stopped using psilocybin, like shrooms, a long time ago, in favor of 4-ACO DMT. And I think there is, you're not getting rid of all the nausea on the come up with 4-ACO DMT, but I feel like it severely diminishes the nausea you get on the come up. And I feel like you get into the psychedelic space, it feels like it's faster. And for me specifically, there was much less anxiety on the come up. Like I could do let's say what would be the equivalent of, let's say, a 7-gram psilocybin trip, and I'm taking a nap on the come up, where if I was doing magic mushrooms, I would literally not be able to turn my brain off for a second. I would be very like on high alert. So
We know that set and setting is extremely important in how these experiences take place, and how we engage with them. So if even if you start off on the wrong foot initially, even a little bit, it can kind of misdirect and occupy you in such a way that you're not getting the full therapeutic benefit out of the experience. So the more we can reduce that, the better. Some of the other stuff I'm working on, again, I'm a big fan of pre-gastric delivery, getting it into the bloodstream as quickly as possible, but then also using administration that is more patient friendly and more patient tolerable. So I'm a big fan of transdermal patches. And I'm working on both DMT and 5-methoxy DMT patches that are able to, you put it on your wrist, and in 10 minutes you have full blood levels. And
full
if you
blood
don't
levels,
want
meaning like you're leading to a breakthrough
20,
experience, or
20 milligrams of DMT
oh wow,
in your bloodstream, boom, in 10 minutes. And then if you don't like what's happening, you take the patch off and blood levels drop precipitously. The other thing is being able to come up with dosage forms that are sustained delivery. So you put the patch on and you get the same type of experience you get with infused DMT over a period of time. And I'm looking at dosage forms that may last up to an hour, even more than an hour. And also being able to look at dosage forms that are almost sub-threshold. So very low dose forms that may be a treatment for neurological issues, TBI-related issues, chronic pain issues associated with TBI, cluster headaches, that sort of thing, without being as impairing as a full DMT experience. And maybe also a treatment for borderline personality or schizophrenia as well.
oh wow, that's incredibly significant. I'm specifically like, yeah, BPD and also schizophrenia. If that can,
Yeah.
wow. In regard, so like you piqued my interest now with the DMT as well. So you have a patch a transdermal patch that you put on that will keep you in the DMT state, or like in a DMT, under the influence of DMT, for, you said, up to 45 minutes.
Yeah, up to an hour.
That's incredible. And is this at like peak breakthrough DMT levels, or is it kind of up and
Well,
down?
that's the other thing that I'm working on. I think one of the other downsides of DMT is how jarring the onset is and how hypertensive the onset is because it's so sudden. So I'm looking at how I can moderate that onset so it's more gradual. So it's a more gradual onset, a broader therapeutic peak, and a gentle descent. So again, patient tolerability and making the experience as patient friendly as possible. Uh, and I think that will make it also more accessible to marginal groups who may or may not want to be in for a really jarring experience.
Yeah, definitely agree. And especially like so with people who are interested in doing DMT but have some fear around it, a lot of times like you'll start them off at lower doses and get them used to the space and then kind of keep titrating upwards as they kind of
Mhm.
get more accustomed to it. So yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense and would make it much more accessible for those who have some fear around it.
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of IV. I'm not a fan of intramuscular injection. I don't think you want to start your psychedelic experience hooked up to an IV. I really like the idea of a patch, and a patch that has sort of this gradual onset and can last up to an hour, depending upon what the clinician's strategy is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I will say, so I was kind of skeptical in regards to IV administration of psychedelics in general. But recently I got offered to do like a ketamine infusion with this clinic in New York. I took them up on the offer. And I did it. It was 2 weeks ago when I did this. And I will say that I don't like needles at all. I really hate needles. But after they put the IV in, like once I was in the kind of this was ketamine I was doing. So once I was in that breakthrough ketamine state, I could not even tell there was a needle on my arm. It was like it wasn't even something that was even there. But to your credit, I will say that if there's someone who has fear already in general when it comes to psychedelics, adding a needle to the equation is not going to make them feel much better. So I definitely see that side of it. But like the other side of that is where I didn't even notice it in my arm at one point, and it was just kind of like I'm going.
Yeah, I can see that. It's just that I feel like, what's the optimal experience? What would be the best experience we could hope for? And why not design around the optimal experience that we can possibly hope for, and try to again make it as patient friendly as possible.
So like my next question would be, or like this is kind of your inspiring questions right now. Um if you're taking DMT through a transdermal patch, or let's say if they had a sublingual formulation, anything, right? Anything that skips first pass digestion. So, like, well, that's the caveat here. Um, is that going to be more similar to a DMT experience or more similar to an ayahuasca experience? I know
I
MAO inhibitors aren't in the equation there, so it can take.
Yeah, yeah, I think it could be similar to an ayahuasca experience.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm anxious to try extended state DMT to see to
Oh,
what extent
likewise.
it's similar to an ayahuasca experience, and without the MAO inhibitor, and see really how different that experience might be. But I have a feeling it's going to be quite similar to ayahuasca without the adverse effects. In other words, no nausea, no purging, all of that, just a sort of a cleaner, uh, less adverse effect type experience. My point of view is, a lot of people think, that the difficulties in ayahuasca are an inherent part of the experience and a necessary part of it, and that it has certain lessons to teach us. That's not necessarily my point of view. I feel like that is some puritanical baggage that we carry around, thinking that you have to suffer a great deal before you can achieve a certain kind of breakthrough or enlightenment. And I'm not so sure it's true.
I definitely agree with what you're saying, but I feel like in some circles that would be considered heretical. Um,
I know, it often is. Yeah, you know, it often
um,
is.
so yeah, this is really, really fascinating. And like this really, really resonates with me. So I have happened to have very strong opinions regarding DMT and other psychedelics. So in regards to psilocybin in general, my overarching opinion has always been I thought psilocin was the better thing to focus on as opposed to psilocybin. It just takes a lot
Yeah,
of variability out of the equation.
I don't want to, point in any particular directions here, but it strikes me that there's this tremendous controversy around the polymorph crystal forms of psilocybin, and how we have like the A polymorph that Compass Pathways says is Comp 360, and that's a unique patentable compound. And you have type B and type C, and by going to psilocin, you kind of leapfrog over all of those IP and patent issues and go straight to, and I'm not sure why, psilocin hasn't really been embraced as kind of the compound of choice for delivery.
I agree. I definitely agree with you. So, and isn't like the polymorphs that Compass has patented, they're just, so from what I've read, they're just byproducts of what happens when you make synthetic psilocybin at scale. It's like ridges that form in the crystal structure.
Well, Alexander Sherwood from Usona, the medicinal chemist at Usona Institute, argues that the three crystal forms, the three polymorphs, occur in mushrooms, and there's kind of a mix of them, and they're not simply a product of a synthetic process. That in fact they are present in mycobotanical extracts. So, I it's a really interesting topic. I'm not sure anybody has tried to say, okay, let's just examine, type A polymorph versus type C polymorph and see what the different therapeutic benefits might be, comparing the two.
Understood. And also, so back to DMT one more time. So I said, so psilocin is definitely something where I once again, I agree with you. More companies should be focused on psilocin. I don't see why not. It just makes more sense. But also we have DMT kind of here in the equation, where in my opinion, it's in regards to, it's one of the more perfect psychedelics that you can administer in a clinical setting. It's just built, it's like right out of the box, it's just like that. And we're even getting to the point where we want to extend the duration of DMT, not make it shorter. So I think that in my perspective, I think DMT has is kind of this dark horse, but I'm very optimistic on DMT kind of really being the psychedelic that can kind of be administered in a clinical setting. It's not going to be like it's not even going to be a 4-hour clinic experience. It can be much shorter. And the therapeutic benefits that come with DMT are second to none. Extremely profound. And it's just perfect right out of the box. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I share that point of view. I think that DMT may be, it may be the best psychedelic for a therapeutic practice. But I think in general, the way we have to look at these legacy psychedelics is we're not simply stuck with, how they affect us with a simple oral administration. We can formulate them and marry them to a delivery technology that allows us to contour them exactly the way we want them. So we're going to make psilocybin shorter, we're going to make DMT longer, and we're going to find where the actual sweet spot is for therapeutic benefit through being able to play with them. And I think we've got some great psychedelics already, and I think the uncertain outcome of the search for novel chemistry, I mean, for myself, I'm spending my time trying to contour what we already have.
Understood. And I really appreciate your perspective on all this. It's really nice to, first of all, it's very validating to hear somebody else talk about DMT, and it makes me feel very happy. Now, do you know anything like specific about deuterated DMT? Because I feel like we're hearing so much about these deuterated psychedelics, and I've never taken a deuterated psychedelic. I don't know enough about it to even formulate a decent opinion on it. But if I can hear from your perspective, that would be great.
It's a common practice in in pharmaceuticals as a way of creating novel IP is to deuterate a compound. In fact, it's like a no-brainer, like pretty standard practice. And you know, does it produce a compound with a really differentiated effect? Not really. We tend to metabolize deuterated compounds more slowly,
Hmm.
slightly more slowly because they're heavier. And from that perspective, if that's what you're trying to accomplish, it may be a better way to go, but not necessarily. Uh, Deuterated compounds uh, often, don't really fulfill their promise.
Understood. Um, so I guess to kind of start kind of tying everything together, can you tell us more about the work you are doing with Spiritus Biosciences? I know you've touched on it now, but if you can kind of.
Yeah, so it's exactly that, being focused on that last mile to the patient of delivery and contouring sort of the existing legacy psychedelics that we already have in a way that's going to, leave them with less adverse effects, make them more targeted, make them safer, and basically more patient friendly and more patient tolerable. So I spend a lot of time thinking about, what would be the psychedelic experience that would be the optimal psychedelic experience? What are the best aspects of each psychedelic compound that I've experienced, and how to kind of weave that together in formulation to create exactly the effect that we're looking for. And there's a tremendous amount of latitude in being able to do that. I also think that it's going to lead to new new strategies for delivery, and I'll give you an example of that. Um, Baeocystine is one of the compounds in psilocybin mushrooms. It may be a precursor compound for psilocybin. It is generally, occurs in very small amounts. But what's interesting about it is it does have agonism at 5-HT2A. Up till now has been sort of the go, no go uh, criteria for what is a psychedelic compound. And one of the things that we know about the 5-HT2A receptor is that governs the response to inflammation and tends to downregulate inflammation. The other thing about baeocystine that's interesting is it doesn't seem to cross the blood-brain barrier. We can't seem to get it into the brain to create an effect in the brain. But when it's paired with either psilocin or psilocybin, we do seem to get a stronger response, at least non-clinically, in a head twitch model in rats. One of the things we're working on is a new baeocystine drug that, rather than using it for a psychedelic, using it for downregulation of inflammation. So we have an oral preparation that goes through and doesn't go through the regular hepatic digestion process. It survives hepatic digestion and then releases the baeocystine in the upper GI tract. Now, what that does essentially is downregulates inflammation at the 5-HT receptors that are in the GI tract, the other place besides the brain where we have a profusion of 5-HT receptors, and may in fact be a treatment for irritable bowel syndrome or irritable bowel disease for that reason. Uh, and we know that there's a tremendous relationship between bowel disorders and psychiatric disorders. So there may be kind of a way of dealing with both, using psychedelics to address sort of the mental aspects, and using another mushroom compound to address the inflammation aspects.
Wow, that's incredibly fascinating. So you would say, so you're saying, is this baeocystine comboed with a psychedelic, or it would just be a formulation of baeocystine that can survive first pass digestion?
Just a baecysteine formulation that survives hepatic digestion.
Wow. And so then have you guys gotten to the point where you know how long the anti-inflammatory properties would last after taking a dose?
I'm at the point now of developing non-clinical research to demonstrate it, in animal models, and on the basis of what we see in animal models, we'll go forward with a new drug product that we'll try to get into clinical trials.
Wow, that's really really interesting, and I guess like that was the perfect thing to say, because now the next question I was going to ask you anyway was, what are you most excited to see in the future when it comes to the psychedelic medicine research? And then the other side of this question is, along with this, do you have any fears about the future of psychedelic medicine?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'll tell you the things I am excited about. I am excited about novel chemistry, and I am interested in what we might see with psychoplastogens. I think that's a whole area of interest, and how we might develop new treatment strategies in the future that combine psychoplastogens with psychedelics, in kind of a combination therapy model. I'm interested in how AI can be used with biomarkers to create novel chemistry. And some companies are kind of looking into this, but we're just kind of at the beginning of that. So one of the other things that I have worked on with other researchers in the past is brain-derived human stem cells, and creating mini brains from those human stem cells, and using those mini brains as a non-clinical model for examining how psychedelic drugs affect the brain. And there are, over 800 biomarkers that we can examine in those models. And we have like at least, several hundred biomarkers that we can look at with fMRI and with brain scans. There's going to come a point where we use AI and all of these biomarkers to tweak our chemistry so that it very directly addresses the kinds of effects and the kinds of treatments that we're looking for. And I think that is promising and interesting.
That is really interesting. So did you mean like just more like having psychedelic formulations could be tailored to you? Or
Well,
am I missing the point?
one aspect of that is, well, first of all, two aspects. One is how biomarkers and the use of artificial intelligence can tweak chemistry to more fully address the biomarkers rather than a treatment outcome, because the biomarkers are extremely quantifiable. So it's a much easier process. But then the other thing is that these biomarkers most often have they're epigenetic biomarkers. So they refer to a specific genetic profile. So we will in the future, I think, be able to say, based upon your individual genetics, here is exactly the right psychedelic compound for you. Here's exactly the right formulation for you. And we can say with some confidence that 6 months down the line, you're going to need this psychoplastogen or an additional experience to ensure the durability of the treatment effect that we started originally. So I think we're going to get really sophisticated as time goes on.
Oh, what an exciting future to be a part of, some aspects.
Yeah.
So, all right. So that is the time that we have for today. I want to thank Del Potter for coming on the show. Del Potter, Chief Science Officer of Spiritus Biosciences. I will include a link to their website in the description. You guys can go check it out or reach out to them, get in contact with them in any way you guys want. I really want to say thank you to Del for coming on the show. This has been a really stimulating conversation. I love talking about psychedelics and especially DMT. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If you want to say anything to the audience, you can feel free to. Otherwise, you can just say goodbye and we can end it here.
It's been a great pleasure, Adam. Love talking about psychedelics as well.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.